evening, everybody. I now call this meeting of the Silver Falls School District Board of Directors to order. All are here. Let's go ahead and go to the flag salute. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next is the Board-Superintendent Operating Agreement, and Josh is going to read that for us tonight.
Under collaborative governance, members of the board and the superintendent will work together in good faith as a team in the best interest of students, modeling a willingness to learn together. Board members will recognize and respect the superintendent's responsibility to manage the school district and direct employees in district and school matters. Board members will give careful consideration, listening to all perspectives, to all issues brought to the board by individuals and district leadership. The board may only make decisions at properly called meetings. Board members recognize that individual members have no authority to take individual action in policy or district and school administrative matters, unless so authorized by the board. Communication agreements. Board members must follow the chain of responsibility and communicate directly with the superintendent when a question arises or a concern or complaint is voiced by a staff member, student, parent, or community member. Board members will endeavor to communicate directly with the superintendent or board chair prior to meetings of the board to address questions and or concerns about agenda items. Board members and the superintendent recognize that good answers often require preparation in advance of board meetings. When a board member and or the superintendent has an individual concern, he or she must communicate one-on-one with any member of the board superintendent team as appropriate. In the interest of public transparency and full, robust debate, board members will endeavor to actively engage in and contribute to board discussions and to share their perspectives on topics before the board. Full participation for board members in advance of a vote supports the board in making informed, well-considered decisions on important district matters.
Thank you, Josh. All right, next is the agenda review.
I move to approve the agenda as published.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the agenda as published. Any discussion? All right, let's vote.
Josh,
Yep.
Derek,
Yes.
Owen,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Phil,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
All in favor?
All right, next is the consent agenda. Is there a motion?
I move to accept the consent agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to accept the consent agenda. Any discussion? All right.
Josh,
Yes.
Derek,
Yes.
Owen,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Phil,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
All in favor?
All right, on to number 5, student representatives. Tonight we have Addison Kruger to give us an update from SHS.
Good evening. My name is Addison Kruger, and my ASB position is school board representative. To get us started on upcoming SHS events, our winter formal semi-formal dance is coming up Saturday, February 5th. Our theme for this year is A Night in New York. ASB students have been working very hard to plan this event, and we are very excited. We have many sports events coming up as well. Our girls basketball team will play Crescent Valley away tonight, and the boys basketball team will play Crescent Valley at home today as well. Both teams will be battling McKay at home on January 22nd. Our wrestling team will have an away meet on January 22nd at South Albany. The team will also have a meet at home versus Central on January 24th. Our swim team will have a meet versus McKay at the Kroc Center on January 25th. To finish this month, we will have our first semester final. The student body has been working really hard, and we are excited to finish off the semester strong. Thank you, and go Foxes.
Thank you,
Thank
Addison. All right, Silver Falls Education Association is not presenting tonight, so we are at the public comment portion of the meeting, the first public comment. And we're glad you are here and welcome you to address the board with your ideas, concerns, or compliments. Please keep the following in mind. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand to be recognized by the board chair. If attending remotely, please use the raise hand feature within Zoom. For the record, please provide your name and relationship to the district. Please keep individual remarks to 3 minutes. If speaking as a representative on behalf of a group of 3 or more, comment time will be extended to 5 minutes. A second public comment period will occur later in the meeting that is specific to discussion and action items only. The board will not hear complaints against individual district staff or board members during public comment. Please understand that the board's primary role is to listen, and you likely will not receive an immediate response. Finally, remember, we all model the way for our students and ask that you share your thoughts respectfully and in accordance with the Silver Falls School District Board Decorum Agreement. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to make a public comment? Anybody online?
There are no raised hands.
All right. Well, I guess we will wait until the next public comment time period to see if somebody else or somebody would like to speak at that point. We are now moving on to administrator and staff reports. We're going to get a report on the SIA grant agreement from Leslie Roach, Director of Teaching and Learning. Hi, Leslie.
Hello. I have nothing further to report on the SIA grant agreement. I shared it with you last month, and this month it just needs to be an action item. I am going to report on the early literacy grant, and usually I like to give you a month to learn about it and then a month for an action item, but we can actually claim those funds immediately once we turn in the board notes, so I'm asking to do both at this meeting. So the early literacy plan is part of a grant that will be part of our integrated programs. So just like SIA, Measure 98, all of those programs go together. They're in one grant. And it's starting late this year. So we are hoping to get the funds very soon. Our allocation for this year is $238,000 about, and then just a little bit more, up $10,000 next year. So that's our funding for the biennium. These are the areas that we reviewed to write the grant around. So we had to rate how we are doing as a district with student belonging. We talked about the Youth Truth Survey and our focal student groups in that section, family and community partnerships, oral language as the root of literacy development. So talked a lot about how we've been implementing Haggerty phonemic awareness instruction in kindergarten, first and second grade. This is our 3rd year of doing that. That it starts with sounds before we transition to letters as kids learn how to read. Reading models based in research, foundational skills, and then later skills, writing, reading, comprehension, vocabulary, and background knowledge, core instruction, and assessment. So we use, for example, the DIBELS 8th edition assessment for all kindergarten through 5th grade students to get a deep dive 3 times a year on how students are progressing. And you hear about that data when our principals come and give their presentation about their student data. And then really reaching all learners. So how are we going to spend this money? We, so far this year, have focused on professional development for staff. So really did work in August before school started with teachers around phonemic awareness instruction and phonics instruction. And we've done that a couple of times throughout the year where we've subbed teachers out and done professional development, and we're moving towards implementing explicit vocabulary instruction, starting especially in 3rd grade and above, so for some of our older students. And then universal screening, we've had DIBELS trainers come in to work with our staff around how do you give the assessment, and then how do you progress monitor student, which is very complicated. If a student is below grade level, you're progress monitoring how they're progressing at a different grade. So there's some complicated things about which test to choose and how to give the assessment. We actually have 4 teachers and classified staff this year who are serving as support for the rest of the district with this implementation, and they are working on extra duty stipends. And we are also supporting the general fund with this grant by covering all elementary reading specialist positions that are not covered with Title 1A funds. So all of our reading specialists will now be completely grant funded and will not come out of the general fund. We are planning on offering a kindergarten jumpstart in August, next August, so that our kindergarten students would have a few extra days of school. We also provide high dosage tutoring within the school day. Those are our reading specialists. Every elementary school has a schedule where students may receive 30 minutes per day, 4 days a week of reading intervention, so above and beyond the 90 minutes they receive in their classroom. And then we have researched aligned curriculum that we actually use the SIA grant to purchase. So in 2022, we purchased Wonders for K-5. In 2022, we purchased Haggerty for K2, and this year we are implementing Terra West Guided Phonics. So all of those materials were purchased before this grant with SIA funds. Our communication plan's pretty simple. You all are pretty aware of it. Parent Square, the website, social media. We have a lot of literacy nights at our elementary schools, parent-teacher conferences where we have really explicit reports that teachers can use to talk about how students are progressing. Our school board meetings where I talk a lot about what grants we're doing, and our Youth Truth Survey. And we are required to have a student growth assessment as part of this grant, and so we are using Amplified Dibble's 8th edition for that. And we do have to have matching funds for this grant, so 25% matching funds from Title 1A, which is federal dollars, and from our student investment account, which is state dollars. And then that is the budget that we've turned in. So it covers all the things that I just was talking to you about, and you can see again, about $170,000 is for our reading specialists. So that's most of what this grant is going to be covering. And that's it. Any questions about this grant?
I don't have questions, but more of a comment. I think that the district's been moving towards these early literacy practices for a while now, and then the state has realized, hey, we really need to get every child in this kind of a trajectory, and then so basically this is affirming the work that we had already started.
Yes, thank you for noticing that. It's early literacy is really the foundation for how our students progress in our school system, and it's really important that we're planning for it appropriately.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so at the end of the meeting, we have this as an action item, and we need to approve both the SIA grant agreement and the early literacy grant. So when we get there, we just need to say that we approve those in order for them to move forward. Okay, we are moving on then. Thank you, Leslie. To discussion items, we've got a couple of policies. The first one is a first read. It's IK, academic achievement.
So I'm going to start actually with IKA and then talk about IK.
Okay.
To give you guys some background, we've been talking about this actually for a couple months. IKA has been up here was on the agenda last month for a recommended delete. There was some, got some feedback from board members. We pulled it from the agenda. And so, because there were some things in IKA that board members felt we didn't want to lose. And so those highlighted portions in IK came from IKA. And so
So those are the additions.
those are the additions. And so we're doing some amendments to IK. And to try to keep these two paired up, and because IKA will be up for a third reading and adoption, or I guess technically a deletion, in February, I would ask the board to adopt IK in February to kind of keep these two paired up.
Any questions or comments about this change? The additions look helpful to me.
Yeah. Appreciate the efforts to get that into IK.
Yep, appreciate the feedback.
So,
I like it.
Okay, so do we need to talk about IKA? No, we're kind of, that's all like 2 in 1,
Yeah.
right?
Correct.
Okay, good. All right, so next up, thank you, Dan. The next on our agenda is the bond discussion, and Scott is going to present to us. We've got actually 4 people, I think, who are going to be participating via Zoom, and Steve is one of them. He is participating from home, and we got a couple other people, 3 other people, and Scott, will you introduce them?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, good evening, board members. We are going to revisit what's already been done in terms of the public engagement around the November bond, and we're going to revisit how we arrived at the middle school portion of that bond, the thinking that went into that, the process that was used. To bring you back up to speed, I think it's really important that we all get on the same page in terms of context. We have Cassie and Dale are here from Wenaha Group. They're going to help present. And we also have Jonah Jensen here from Sage Architecture. And Jonah facilitated all 15 of the long-range facilities planning committee meetings. And we work with Jonah for over 2 years. And so he's here as well to provide some historical context. And we're fortunate to have them here. At the end of the information today, that's when you'll have a discussion about what direction the board wants to go in terms of a May bond. And the reason why it's important that we go over this information here is we don't have the time to run in a completely separate public input process to develop a new bond, which would take 18 months to 2 years. What we have now is what we've done leading up to the November election, all of the community input, and hundreds of people who provided feedback during that process. That's what we have to work with right now. And this one's solely focused on the middle school. And then there's a couple of slides we'd like to go over on some really dire needs at the high school, this building, to protect our investment. And so when we leave tonight, what I really need to know is what direction the board is leaning towards, so that when we come back to you in February, that is a meeting you'll take action on whether or not we go for a bond in May, that we have clarity around that. Okay. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. Dale, I think I'm going to turn it over to you, and you're going to walk us through the presentation. And just for everybody here, each of our board members has seen the presentation, provided their input as well, and we tried to factor that into what the final product is tonight that you'll see.
Okay. Cassie just texted me that she had to reboot her router, so I expect her to hop back on momentarily. And she's actually going to escort us through the presentation. I will do my best to get started. Is the PowerPoint available, or was Cassie intending to broadcast that? I think.
Yeah, Cassie was going to broadcast that.
Let me obtain an ETA, excuse me.
She texted me and said she's getting on a hotspot right now.
Okay. She is in Eastern Oregon, where it's probably still quite icy. Jonah, we could start with some introductions. Do you want to describe your, here comes Cassie back on, but why don't we go ahead and start the introductions, Jonah?
Absolutely, Dale. Thanks, Scott, for introducing me earlier. The one change that you may have noticed, for those of you that do know me, is that I was at BLRB Architects when I facilitated the long-range facility planning process. Since then, have co-founded Sage Architecture, and we're an Oregon-based architectural practice with offices in Portland and Bend. And at Sage, we really believe in community-centered approach that focuses on how people learn, live, work, play, and thrive within the spaces we co-create with our clients. Just on a personal note, I personally have over 20 years of experience of near exclusive focus on public K-12 educational planning and design. Though I've designed a lot of projects from the ground up, my real specialty is phased modernizations, and I've led some teams on really incredibly complex projects in Marion County, the state of Oregon, Washington, as far east as Pittsburgh, and much of that work has been in the range of the $30 to $90 million. So just a little context there.
I'll introduce myself, and then Cassie, you're gonna push the PowerPoint up. Okay. I'm Dale Kuykendall, and I'm a project executive with the Winnaha Group. We're a Northwest regional company that had our roots in Pendleton. For the past 5 years, I was leading a program at Corvallis after they passed their bond in 2018. And I'm now mostly managing work up in Federal Way, although I still support Willamette Valley efforts with some team that work down there. I started my career as a contractor about 40 years ago now, and have shifted into the owner's representative role 8 years ago, and I'm enjoying that a lot. Cassie.
Hello, everybody. Sorry about that. It was about perfect timing. My power blinked just as Scott was doing his introduction, and I'm back. So Cassie Hibbert, Senior Project Manager with Winnaha Group. I work with Dale. I'm based out of Eastern Oregon, and I lead our company's pre-bond division, working with K-8 school districts in crafting their projects to put them in front of the voters. And we're very happy to be back with you tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and hope that power stays good with us. Everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Mhm.
All right. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide, which is just our agenda for tonight. So as Scott mentioned in his introduction, everything that we're going to go through tonight was either covered as part of the long-range facility planning process or the bond advisory committee process. So some of this content will be familiar to a lot of people. But we thought as the board looks at a decision for May of 24, it's good to bring this all back together in front of you in a single package. So what we'll run through tonight is just the process that's gone on over the many years to get to where we are today. We'll take a look at some of the unique things about the Silverton Middle School site that influence a lot of the decisions related to it. We'll take a look at large public construction projects and cost estimating strategies for that. And then we'll dive into the long-range facility planning committee and the work that was done. Jonah's going to take us through that section since he had a lead role in that. Then we'll take a look at the bond advisory committee work, and I'll run through a portion of that and tag team some of that with Dale and Jonah. Then we have some good news for you on some market changes that are going to influence the overall pricing on the project. And at that point, we'll just take a pause and open it up for Q&A on the middle school portion only. And then after we finish that, we'll take a look at the potential high school projects and then a couple of pricing tiers. And then we'll open it up just again for a general Q&A. So this slide here is not one that Winnaha created. This is a slide that the district created to show all the work that's gone on since 2017 to get us up to today in the board's consideration for a bond project. The two areas that we're going to focus on tonight, as I mentioned, were the long-range facility planning portion, kind of there in the middle, circled in red, and then the latest bond advisory committee work, which happened over the past 18 months. Hey, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jonah to talk about our Silverton Middle School site.
Yeah, thanks, Cassie. There's a few significant site constraints, as you all know, at the Silverton Middle School. The gymnasium received the seismic grants about 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, and that work was completed. That really ties the hands a little bit of what you can do. You know, the SRGP and the stipulation behind that is that needs to remain operational and in use for 10 years after the completion. There's also utilities that run right through the Schlater building, the original Schlater building that's there in red. And in any scenario, however this is phased, however it's built, those utilities will need to remain operational and intact. And so just thinking about that as we approach the project, or as the team approaches the project after passing the bond, is pretty critical.
All right, I'll talk a little bit about the large public projects world. And as I mentioned, I've been doing this for decades, and it's been quite apparent to me that there is a big difference between private and public commercial projects. I have not done much residential construction, but I've seen both private and public in the commercial sector. And there are a lot of legal requirements around public contracting. You have to bid the work and get proposals for it. You have to pay prevailing wages, which are typically quite close to the union scale. There's a requirement for 1.5% of the construction budget to go towards green energy, which in this region is typically solar panels on the roof or on some adjacent area on the site. You have to always remember soft costs, which can amount to 25 to 30% of the overall construction budget, or excuse me, the overall project budget. That includes design fees and management fees and legal fees and furnishings and technology and all sorts of other pieces that are not part of the usual general construction contract. To protect the public, we always need to make sure that contingencies are budgeted, particularly on a site that has renovations or existing structures in place. There's often things that are not found early because they're completely covered by structure. Buildings like this are expected to last at least 50 years, and a lot of school buildings really last longer, and they really start to deteriorate after a while if you don't use the right materials when you build them originally. Code requirements are far higher in the public arena, particularly schools, for safety of the students and staff and public. All of these aspects require a different caliber of contractor than your typical residential construction company. And this one is also mine. So talking a little bit about how we generated cost estimates for the project. Our goal is to be, in the right countryside for the work. We don't want to be too high because that means people aren't going to want to vote for it, or too low. They might vote for it, but then we can't deliver what's needed. It needs to be in the right spot. We work hard to get there. Our company has been doing this for 13 years now as owners' representatives, but most of our PMs have long careers like me and others that have been doing this way before that. So we know what goes into estimating and cost development for these complex projects. We analyze the projects, and you'll see some of that in later slides, and then provide information to our cost estimating partners. These are professionals that have been doing this in this market for years, and they generate detailed cost estimates, which we then review with the district, the design team, and also industry partners that we know also. So it's quite a process to get the numbers where they are. And then kind of in parallel with that, we're looking for comparative projects that are similar. And you'll see some slides that will talk about that next. So what are good comparative value for these projects? Recent, need to be public, as I described earlier. It should be similar. It's a replacement and demolition on the same site. We call it the flip-flop concept. Should be close to where this project will occur, and you need to make sure you include the soft cost side of the budget. An inaccurate comparison project would be just kind of the flip side of those things. It's older than 3 years. It's private. It's residential. It's light commercial, and there's a significant difference between light commercial and public school construction. Different states have significantly different prevailing wages or just wages in general. Different market conditions. Out on the east side where Cassie is, costs are historically lower than they are over here, and that kind of makes sense. And then a lot of times the public might have a perception, well, I know how much it costs to build this building. Well, they may not be fully aware of the soft cost side of that equation, designs and permits and et cetera, et cetera. Here are some comparisons that we have used, and then we'll show you some information later on a more recent one. Right now, our project is in line with kind of the lower end of these comparative prices. So these projects are similar. They're flip-flop designs. They're public. They're big, substantial schools in the region. So they're good comps. Jonah.
Thanks, Dale. While at BLRB, we, as Scott mentioned, we facilitated the long-range facility planning process. As many of you know, this is a really extensive process. It's much more extensive, candidly, than I'd ever been involved in. Just quite a few years, quite a few meetings, lots and lots of voices, lots of stakeholders, a really engaged process. That provided that really good foundational information to move forward with. Though we looked just district-wide and at all the schools and all around the area, there really was 2 recommendations that really rose to the top and that were kind of omnipresent throughout the entire process. One of those recommendations was that Silverton Middle School should be the primary focus of the effort because of its imminent need. And then that second thing that became really apparent is that Silverton Middle School should be replaced rather than renovated. And that was a recommendation that had come from the Long Range Facility Plan Committee through that process. And so that's kind of the direction that this had headed. With those 2 recommendations and really thinking about that, we devoted a few of those meetings just in exploring what the middle school could be, just as a way of getting a foundation and understanding what the cost implications and some of the phasing could look like. These aren't necessarily what it would end up being, but it's just a way to get an idea of cost. So we explored really 4 options in earnest. 3 of those options were on the Schlater campus and effectively attached to that existing gymnasium and locker rooms. One of the options that we actually looked at was north of this site between the transportation building and the baseball field and on district property. That one was considered non-viable by the committee because it didn't attach to that existing gym that we needed to keep operational for 10 years and in use. And really where the committee settled on at that time was replacing the building essentially in a very similar footprint to the Schlater campus now. There was a reference for the location and its adjacency to Schlater because that's where it had been historically, not necessarily a reference to the historic building itself or the additions that were attached to it over the years. Next slide, please. you know, actually, no, I think you're gonna do this one, Cassie. Are you
Yeah.
gonna do this one? Got ahead of myself.
Yeah, so transitioning from the work of the Long Range Facility Planning Committee into the Bond Advisory Committee, we took as part of that where the Long Range Facility Planning Committee had left off. And they were really clear that we need to consider the middle school and we need to consider replacement of the middle school. So we took that as the starting point. So coming into the Bond Oversight Committee, we started with the blue box on the left, which Jonah just described for us. But as part of Winnaha's involvement, we also started digging into a few things. And so as part of this, we put on the table another additional concept, which is the one in orange in the middle, which we're calling the James Street concept and the flip-flop. And the reason for this is the Schlater concept in the blue did have some complexity to it regarding how that original building was sited and how the phasing would work out. So we proposed this new flip-flop consideration, which we're going to describe in a little bit more detail for you here, because it could potentially save a few dollars, and then it also had a shorter construction duration. And then also, as part of the Bond Advisory Committee work, we had one of our committee members raise the question about remodel. And so we did want to make sure that we gave that question a fair investigation. So we looked into that as well. That's the one on the right side in kind of the dark green. And so you can see there were three options that were considered by the Bond Advisory Committee. The one the committee eventually selected is the one in the middle, the orange, the James Street concept flip-flop. But just to, as part of this effort to kind of talk through what all these options are, we'd like to go through the one in orange and the one in dark green for you in some more detail so you understand what all was in there. So I'll go ahead and move to the next one, and I'm going to go ahead and toss it back to Dale.
All right, so this slide basically vets out the concept of the flip-flop. You can see the four phases that we identified. First, you need to move the modulars and basically construct a new maintenance building to make way for the new construction. That's kind of phase one. Modulars, who knows where they'll go, somewhere on the campus, hopefully, or at least nearby in the district, so that they're adjacent to this building. The new construction is in yellow in the top of that phase two slide. And that process is a fairly typical project, although you still have to be quite careful with adjacencies to student and travel patterns, et cetera, just for safety. After that is built, you demo the existing buildings where students were habitating. You do a light remodel of that gym, and then you complete the site work. And overall, this is not a short project by any means. It's about 28 months, but it is a shorter duration than the full-blown renovation project that takes about 6 phases and about 12 months longer. We analyzed the schedule costs. We analyzed there you go. Thanks, Cassie. Kind of analyzed the phases and their durations, and that helped us influence how the pricing went together. Schedule is a big determinant in general contractor costs. It's called general conditions, and they can be, well in excess of $100,000 a month to keep the team operating during the duration of the project. So, we feel solid about the concept. It's doable. It's the kind of project that happens a lot with districts that don't have tons of excess property lying around. And that's what we generated. And the gym ties into it significantly. That 10-year obligation to keep the gym intact played into the equation.
So we've kind of really touched on sort of big picture and what led to that and the exploration for that, getting a little bit more micro and what led into the initial exploration and understanding of the building. Before we even looked at concepts during the long-range facility planning process, we sat down with Brett and some administrators and educators from Silverton Middle School, did a really thorough analysis of existing program, of what was there, of what the projected enrollment would be, at the site and looked at any kind of underutilized space, looking at space that's too small, just looking at areas that aren't code compliant and aren't accessible, and assigning proper square footages to those areas. And so this is really, believe it or not, this is kind of a very big picture summary of all of that really great work that we did with that team. And this just really demonstrates the square footage allotment from either a code minimum requirement or from creating space that actually serves functionally for learning and for education. And so you can kind of see how it breaks out with administration, student services, the general education program, special education, CTE and arts, performing arts, the library, the student commons, and then a lot of the back of house stuff, the building services, thinking about the elevators, the stairs, and the access. And then one of the questions that has come up a few times is the auxiliary gym, and kind of just how big is that auxiliary gym, and just wanted to provide some clarity on that. The actual box itself in the auxiliary gym is 7150. And that was really generated as to be able to have competition within that space, but to also have 8 rows of spectator bleacher seating and one row on the other side. So that kind of is about the size that it needs to be, using the auxiliary gym at Silverton High School as a baseline. The additional square footage is for PE and athletic storage within that space. All of that new square footage adds up to just a hair over 91,000 square feet. And if you add in the existing building, the existing gym, locker rooms, that gets you up to about almost 115,000 square feet. This program is sized appropriately for 550 students at a 22 per student classroom ratio. If you were to go 25, which is much of the classrooms, it can get up to 600, but that factors in utilization, thinking about planning periods and things like that. So some of those spaces you would never max out to capacity, i.e. the basic skills, the functional skills, and those will take up a lot of square footage for the smaller student population. So that's all kind of been factored in, and just wanted to provide some clarity on the student capacity of this program.
All right. Last slide on James Street for the moment is just to talk about what is included in the estimates that have been prepared. As Jonah mentioned, the new construction, the renovation of some of those existing spaces, replacement of play fields and tennis courts that won't survive the construction process or be in the right place. Replacing the back of house spaces, like the maintenance building needs to get out of the way. A lot of site work, driveways, drop-offs, etc. A lot of utility work to probably come off of James Street instead of Schlater Street in a lot of cases, if not all cases. Got to relocate the modulars before and after construction, so there's a bit of a shuffle going on throughout that process. The green energy that I mentioned earlier is included, the schedule impacts, all of the soft costs, design, management, inspections, permits, etc. The furnishings and equipment, demolition and hazardous material abatement. They're old buildings. There's a lot of known materials there, and there's a lot that have yet to be uncovered that will be discovered. And then the last two are just important as we realize how long it takes to design and construct a project. The escalation to midpoint of construction is basically a recognized industry standard cost increase as the years go by. And it says to midpoint of construction because when contractors and subcontractors and suppliers bid these projects, that's kind of what they anticipate. They know they're not going to deliver their products at the first of the project, so they forecast out in their pricing as well. And lastly is the contingency that we mentioned earlier. You got to be careful to make sure you have some money in your pocket for those unforeseens that you just cannot plan for. Pros and cons of the remodel process. And the pros, there are some, and there they are. Character of the buildings may be important to some folks. It's a good perception. I mean, hey, you guys are reusing stuff that's there. It is a little bit less expensive, and there's trade-offs to that. The remodel would improve the existing learning environment to some extent, and it does provide an additional extension of life for those buildings. On the con side, there are a lot more, and I find it somewhat amusing. The character of the 50s and 60s buildings is on both sides, and architecture is in the eye of the beholder, as Jonah could probably attest. It does take a lot longer. It's more disruptive to students. And when you think about the impact of 28 months of construction versus 40, that difference is significant. And some students would essentially, go to this school and never see an undisturbed day. So if we can figure out a way to minimize that schedule, that would be best. Construction, it's noisier. It's part of the same comment. It would take additional temporary portables to pull off the complete renovation project. We would advocate, and have included in our estimates, higher contingency for the remodel project than for the new construction. Essentially, renovation maintains the existing downsides that Brett is dealing with on a daily basis in terms of teaching at that facility. Costs are just higher, increased complexity due to phasing. There's just a lot of design and management costs that have to be factored into our estimates, and they are in our estimates. This one is a good, fairly similar example of some of the 50s, 60s wings might look like this if we started a renovation project. And what you'll notice is that it's pretty much down to the bare bones. And in fact, the bare bones are being reinforced in this picture with things that are required to bring it up to current seismic codes. You can't see it, but the roofing was completely removed, plywood installed, and then a new roof on top of that. In this project, doors are getting improved headers for seismic strength. There's all kinds of strapping being installed, tie down anchors. There's a lot of work that goes into a significant renovation to bring a school up to current codes. And that requires, mechanical, electrical upgrades for current ventilation standards. We've all learned a lot about ventilation standards through the recent pandemic exercise. So it's important to remember that there's a lot of systems that will need to be completely replaced in these buildings. A lot of known and unknown asbestos materials will be discovered in that building. I guess that's the gist of the remodels. I think that picture was highly illuminating to me anyway. This, I'm not going to dive too deep because they're hard to see, but essentially this represents the phasing approach that we developed for this renovation approach. We had to do this in order to determine the schedule, and also, how many moves the students would have to make, and where the modulars, could go and not go, and et cetera, et cetera. You'll notice that this concept, the red is the existing building. It gets replaced essentially in kind. And that kind of reinforces what I said a minute ago about Brett having to, continue to live with an existing layout that doesn't support education very well. This is the schedule that represents that phasing, and then as you may be able to see, or maybe it's too blurry, about a 12-month increase in that duration, and that has a significant cost as well. Hello, sir. Sorry. Got a visitor. And let's see, regather my thought here. The remodel cost estimate. So this is kind of information that was generated and kind of demonstrates the added costs and savings factors as we put together the estimate. So 60% of the cost was what we estimate the renovation cost compared to new construction. And that's based on some comparative costs from other projects throughout the region. So added cost, more management, more oversight, more abatement, more safety measures for traffic management for a longer duration, lots of moving of classes and offices, lots of temporary walls for routing people around in both the new and old buildings. You'd have to provide some sort of temporary food service and cafeteria, and that can be a costly service to maintain. Utilities, as Jonah mentioned early on, are a big problem in the renovation project to keep them all going during the process. It is a higher risk project to do a renovation, and that is why we would advocate for a higher contingency in the budget as well. So Cassie, I think you're next.
Yeah, so all of this information we ran through with the Bond Advisory Committee. And so, you know, they looked at the James Street flip-flop at 75 million and 20, I'm going to get my numbers right, 26 months of construction. And then they looked at the remodel at 68 million and 40 months of construction. And we had a very thoughtful discussion about it, but the BAC almost overwhelmingly went for the replacement flip-flop option because it was less disruptive to the educational environment. It had fewer temporary costs, so they didn't want to spend money toward things that they weren't going to get as part of the end package. And then it had a shorter construction duration as well. So the bottom line on that was, though they recognized that the remodel option cost less, it was not seen as the best value for the district. So they settled on the James Street flip-flop. So then coming out of that, just in the past couple of months, we've started to see some softening in the market, which basically translates into good news for the school district. So, you know, the pandemic was a pretty tough time with supply chain difficulties, cost increases, and we're just starting to see that slow down. And the biggest example of it slowing down is that we got a new comparison data point that came in November 2023 for the Lake Oswego Middle School project. And we know that Silverton's not Lake Oswego, right? But we're studying that as a comparison project. And so Dale and one of our colleagues spent a fair amount of time talking with the cost estimator that had put that together, the team that the general contractors that had bid on that project, and really dug into those numbers. And so then we went back and also reviewed the budget that we had prepared for Silver Falls and said, hey, this good news with the market softening, we think that we can trim a little bit off this budget. And just as a reminder on this budget, we're trying not to be too high. We're trying not to be too low. We're trying to be just right on that because we want a budget that's achievable and reasonable so that the district can deliver on the promises that they're making. So bottom line on this is that middle school budget that we had originally was the 75 million. And we come to you with confidence and say that we think that we can trim that down by about $4 million, and that with that market improvement, $71 million can achieve that same program. And that's even including adjusting our escalation for a construction start that's 6 months later than we had originally planned. So that would be the shift from your November 23 bond to your May of 24 bond. Okay, so at this point, that wraps up our middle school discussion. So I'd like to pause at this point and offer the board an opportunity to ask any questions about the middle school. And then once we're done on this, we will talk just briefly about the high school projects. So at this point, I'll just turn it back over to the chair to lead any questions.
Go ahead, Josh.
Hey, Cassie. So this goes back to an email that you and I had a long time ago talking about soft costs and hard costs. And the 23% for the soft costs seems like that's a combination of both the hard and soft combined, because that's just 30% for just soft and contingencies, but no hard costs associated. So am I missing something, or did we just combine it, or?
Oh, let's see. Let's go back to that slide here. I think we're talking about, you're referring to this slide, Josh?
Correct. Yes, Cassie.
Okay, so the soft costs are 23% of the budget, and that's inclusive of architecture, engineering, project management, permit, other costs, geotech, site survey, all those sorts of things. That's also inclusive of the furnishings and the equipment for the building. And then your project contingency, your owner's contingency is 7% of the budget. And so then the remaining 70% would be your hard cost, your construction cost, the cost that you would get on bid day, basically.
Thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead, Derek.
Yeah, you mentioned the softening of costs as it related to a remodel. Is there any recognized cost savings for the remodel project if we were to use the existing building? Like going from 68, is there also a recognized like 4 million cost savings, or can you address that at all, please?
I'll take a stab at it.
Sure.
There would be a probably prorated version of a cost reduction there. I don't know if it'd be the full 4 million, probably not. It'd be some small percentage less than that.
Thank you.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
And this is, well, I guess anybody can answer it, but was there any consideration of a remodel of the 1938 section of the building and not building anything new really, but just utilizing the 1938 along with the wings and doing I guess Jonah called it a modernization, I think is what you said, a modernization remodel?
Yeah, during the long-range facility planning process, we'd asked the question from the group if we wanted to take a look at that. And we decided not to take a look at it in earnest. We had done some kind of back of the napkin, just looking at it internally, just to see what that could be. And there's some pretty significant impacts and things that have to be taken into consideration with the Schlater campus building, that 1938. I kind of mentioned at the beginning, just having a huge resume of doing these modernizations of these historic buildings, and personally, it's something that I love doing. They are extensive. There's just a lot of the seismic reinforcing, in particular with unreinforced masonry at these kinds of buildings. This particular building has a variety of classroom sizes, some of them going as small as 600 square feet, with a 22-foot width to those classrooms. A more ideal classroom scenario is kind of a 30 by 30 or even a 28 by 32. So there's a lot of built-in inefficiencies into that existing building. But to answer your question more directly, did we present an option that showed all of that? We did not during the long-range facility planning process.
Based on your experience on these type of buildings and the projects, are you able to offer an opinion as to whether or not, using that 1938 building would be more expensive than raising it and rebuilding, or would it be comparable? Or I don't know if you can offer any input on that.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. it would be hard for me to give an exact figure without really diving into it. My experience has been historically buildings of this character and this nature and this vintage are traditionally comparable in cost, believe it or not, to a brand new. Because I mentioned the seismic reinforcing. A lot of times, what you have to do is like that slide that Dale showed with complete gutting. That was kind of showing more of like the sort of the 60s and the 70s and the 50s era. This is, you essentially would have to build gigantic, what we call like a secondary or redundant structure inside the building to hold up the floors, because then you'd have to tear out all of the, likely would have to tear out all of those interior walls and create shear walls in their place. A lot of times those shear walls will end up being concrete, and then you'll drag that concrete all the way down to the ground and create gigantic grade beams within the building, or micro piles and things like that you wouldn't typically do in new construction. And it gets to be really expensive. So you're really spending a lot of money in the actual shoring of the facility and just holding it up during construction, just so you can replace and put new, essentially. So I guess, again, answering more directly, I wouldn't be surprised if this was comparable in cost for this particular part of the building.
Well, it would also seem with the intertwining of our utilities that if you were to go in and do what you've just described in the 1938 structure, that it would be pretty difficult to remain in operation anywhere else on the facility as well. I mean, that seems like that would be nearly impossible.
Yeah. Anecdotally, there's, just in my experience on these kinds of buildings, I've never, no matter how much investigative work that you do to try to uncover all the unforeseens, no matter which contractor you get on board to do that during the process, there's always going to be something that you're going to be massively surprised by. One example that I had about 10 years ago was the contractor from over 100 years ago knocked down the building that was there before and used all of the rubble for the base of that building. So when we had to dig down for the grade beams, it essentially compromised the entire building. So we had to completely shore up the sides. There's no way to know that was there. I had another project about 15 years ago, Stadium High School in Tacoma. I don't know, you may have seen the movie 10 Things I Hate About You. It's that castle.
Building.
Yeah, I renovated that one, and we found a complete basement underneath one section of the wing that there was no documentation, there was no investigation to uncover. There was an investigation, but there was no conclusive evidence until we actually dug into it. So even with all those contingencies and all the padding that Winnaha has done a really good job of doing in that cost estimate, you're still gambling. You really are. And it's I've had times where it was actually more expensive than building new. So it's a big gamble, to be honest.
Thank you.
I don't know who would field this question, but on the contingency, is that standard 7% or is that lower, higher? I mean, are we where we should be with the contingency figure of 7%?
Dale, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I think that's the right place to be. Yeah, yes, I do. Maybe you could shave it a little lower if you weren't dealing with a site that had an existing building on it, and it comes back to what Jonah just said. What could lurk beneath? You just never know. I wouldn't want to see it go to 5 at this early stage or anything like that.
Okay. Another question on these comps. Are we comparing apples to apples? In other words, are these all project costs also, full projects?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Now, the Athey Creek, that wasn't a flip-flop, was it?
I'll have to double check. I thought it was, but I won't.
No, yeah, I think they're taking the old campus, making that the new Riverside High School, and then Athey Creek is being built ground up on a new site. So, and then what is industry standard on percent or ratio, whatever you want to put it, to total square feet to classroom square feet? I know they generally consider a ratio of how big a building should be.
Yeah, my apologies. Could you repeat that question?
Yeah, what's standard ratio for buildings or industry standard for the ratio of total square feet compared to classroom square feet?
Oh, like if you just took the overall building square footage and took the classroom. and
Right.
just kind of-
For example, on this, if you take away the existing gym part, so we're talking the 91,000, it's roughly, just ballparking figures, it looks like it's roughly 3-to-1 total square feet compared to classroom. That seems awfully heavy. That seems like a lot of space. That's not classroom space.
Yeah, a lot of square footage does come from the gymnasiums and comes from the common space and even the media centers and libraries. And to some degree, they are education. When we look at our classroom capacity as an example,
Yeah.
at a gym, we consider the gym a teaching station because you'll have PE in there. But it's a bigger teacher station, right? I mean, it's much bigger. So I wouldn't know off the top of my head what the typical ratio would be. It kind of just really depends on how much of an emphasis, and I'll just say Project X, has on athletics versus education, or even like if a school does, as an example, which you call a gymatorium, which would condense your square footage quite a bit, but then you lose the functionality of your gym space during lunch periods. So on a ratio specifically to this project, the general purpose classrooms, we were looking around 28,000 square feet. If you add in the Title I ELD, that was close to 30. And then we had special ed 35. So about almost 40. So it's about almost half is what you would maybe consider a traditional educational space, and then half is circulation, building structure, mechanical, electrical, central custodial, gymnasium space, common space, and admin space. So in this particular instance, it's about half.
Yeah. When you do the square footage compared to these other comps and everything, it just seemed like a lot of square footage for 600 enrollment when we compared the others and their enrollment. So that's why I was asking.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and some of that, candidly, some of that square footage is some very underutilized space. The gymnasium mezzanine, the existing gymnasium mezzanine, as an example, it's not quite large enough to be an auxiliary gym. And so that's going to add to your square footage. And then there's some inefficiencies, slight inefficiencies to tying a building into it. But as far as everything else, like when you look at classrooms and things like that, they're industry standard, 900 square foot classrooms, basically. Did that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, I think the one that caught my eye was the Bethel one. It's pretty darn close to matching us situationally and everything. It's a flip-flop. It's on the same site. It's going to, student population-wise, it's the same. It's 95,000, and it's got 2 gyms in it. So this, for us, is, 92,000 with one auxiliary gym. And so it just seemed like kind of heavy on the square footage. And so I was wondering where that space was, I guess is what I was, in comparing it to these actual comps that you guys had.
What was the price of that one?
That one was 59 million.
59, okay, thanks.
And so,
Yeah,
and,
no,
and
that's
plus cost-wise, that was 59 million, and that's putting in an artificial turf softball field on that one and everything, going with the Bethel one. So it just seemed like ours was kind of high on square footage.
no.
I was wondering where it was coming from.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and to be quite honest, I haven't personally dove into the actual square footage of Bethel,
Yeah.
to see where that might be. What I do know, anecdotally from Bethel, is they had some really, really significant challenges with meeting their bond promise, in talking to their chief financial officer at that time. So they may have made some cuts, and I'm just thinking out loud. They might have condensed classrooms to be not optimal size, as an example. But again, that's anecdotally. I couldn't tell you with confidence that that's what happened.
Yeah.
Derek, did you have another question?
Just kind of follow up the capacity number of 550 to 600. Was that based off the population study and kind of forecasting into the future about where Silverton could potentially head as far as number of students that would be utilizing a middle school in the future?
Yeah, it had very, very minimal growth projected per the PSU enrollment projection, which, if I remember right, was done in 2018. If I recollect, the 2028 was just a little over 500, if I remember correctly. And so that's kind of where we started to get our number. But to be honest, where we really settled on our number mostly was literally taking all of the programs that were there currently and all of the assigned spaces that were there currently, and assigning appropriate square footages for those spaces, and then adding kind of like a multi-purpose space for the art program as an example. So that's kind of where it was, because it showed very, very, very modest growth in those enrollment projections.
And just to clarify again, Jonah, you said that it's based on a 22 student per classroom ratio, right?
Yeah, that would be at the 550. And that's really assuming that all of those classrooms are full for 6 periods, and then you have one planning period. So that's when I say utilization, that's what you're taking into account. Now, we all know that not all classrooms are always full at all times. Either, you may not have enough students to fill that particular program and things like that. But if it was at full capacity at 22 students per general classroom, that's the number. Basic skills, functional skills, we looked at more like an 8 student, just because of the need for ambulatory issues and motor skills and things like that. Structured learning program, LRC, has a smaller student ratio in those classrooms as well. But the general purpose, the videotech, and those kinds of spaces, we looked at from the 22 to 25.
Thank you. Other questions?
I have one
Tom?
more.
I
Go ahead,
got a
Tom.
quick one, Jonah. The remodeled gym, how long would it have the same remaining lifespan as the rest of the building, or would it, maybe that's something you really hadn't investigated, but it's a pretty simple structure, robust. Do you think it'd last as the same? We have a new building, and would that gym last? Anyway, you know my question there.
Yeah, absolutely. The seismic improvements help immensely, and that's a big part of it. there is some dollars in here to do some modernization at that gym. Just doing the roofing. Just making sure that the roofing's intact. That's one of your biggest contributors to, a project. Kind of shortening its useful life, because water infiltration getting into the structure and things like that. It's built pretty substantially, and with those seismic improvements, that helps a lot. Now, if you look at it, you're always going to know that this was kind of an older portion of the building, and here's the newer portion of the building, and there'll have to be some work done to dress that up. But I haven't done a very, very thorough investigation into structurally. But from looking at it, it looks like it would still, have a lot of useful life left.
So I'll add to that one too, maybe.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, so the seismic rehabilitation grant program is pretty rigorous on what they allow funds to be spent on. And it's really, they keep it targeted just to seismic improvements. And so one of the truisms of remodels is that when you remodel one portion of a building and not the other portion, or you put a new building next to an existing building, it always makes your existing building look a little worse. And so that building would also need some upgrades just on the finishes and aesthetics of it, so that it looks as good as your new building, and then also hitting the MEP requirements as well, so that it has the same quality on that as it does in the rest of the building. I'll toss it to Dale. Maybe you're going in that direction.
That's what I was going to say. MEP, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems will be integrated into the new building. If not replaced, at least integrated so that they function as a whole.
Okay, so that's all allocated.
Yes.
Thank you.
Owen.
Yeah, so my question is that we've had some community suggestion that we investigate modular construction, at least for a portion or portions of the design. And so I just wanted to hear from your experience in seeing modular construction. Is there any opportunity in terms of cost savings there? What are some pros and cons in that arena?
I'm happy to take this, unless you want to take it, Cassie or Dale.
My experience with modular construction has been mostly the modular classroom type. I have not done any large scale, big population schools with that method. So Jonah, all yours.
Then maybe
Yeah.
I'll tie my thought up after you go.
Okay. Yeah, modular building, candidly, one of the biggest benefits to modular construction is potentially saving on schedule, because it is built off-site essentially, and you crane it in, so you could be doing all of your foundations and all of that groundwork in preparation for those modules. What it does do, there's a variety of things that it does. In order to get a really quality learning environment, you really have to upgrade the specifications on those modular buildings, because they are built very, very cheaply, to be quite honest. So when you think about everything from acoustics between classrooms to, even the roof sheathing and what that's constructed out of, if you don't specify kind of more robust materials, the lifespan of that building will be significantly shortened. And they're just not built to be 50-year buildings. They're kind of a shorter duration. The more complexity that you add to them, and the more specification that you add to them, the bigger the cost. So I have seen projects where I've been astounded by the cost per square foot and what they did, but then you walk in and you can hear all the kids, from every classroom over, and you can see the bouncing of the floor and things like that. So it's really comes down to value in what you want there. Conversely, when you look at like something as an example, a pre-engineered metal building, and we've all seen them, those work great for spaces like covered plays, sometimes even gyms, But again, if you start adding complexity to those buildings, those manufacturers don't like that. And so they end up driving the cost up. And so you don't get as much value as you'd like to see. And then you have a modular or pre-engineered metal building.
So maybe I'll finish up that comment and just say that where we are today is the beginning of the design journey, not the end of the design journey. So once, if when the district is successful in passing their bond, then there's going to be a fair amount of community engagement on what this building actually looks like, right? There'll be lots of discussion about that. If the community is still feeling really strongly about pursuing modular options, that's something that the design team can really dive into and do some pricing comparisons on that and really weigh pros and cons of schedule and all those things that Jonah was just talking about. And as that design journey continues, right, the team's always looking for efficiencies and how can we do things more efficient? How can we do things more cost effective? Because we recognize we're working with taxpayer dollars, right? And if there's monies that can come back at the end, that's wonderful. But what we want to do now is have a realistic budget so that you know that you can accomplish what you need to, and then we'll just continue to kind of work that problem and get that design input as we go along through the design process.
I have something, or go ahead on.
No, that's all I had. Thank you.
Go ahead, Josh.
One point of clarification for people who, we keep saying modular construction. I think that might be how it's generally referred to, but we're talking about prefabrication of certain structural materials, walls, whatnot, at an off-site location to reduce prevailing wages. And like Jonah said, keep things on a better timeline. Now, our public has been pretty clear that they want more details. And you just said that unless we pass the bond, we can't really get into the nitty gritty of what type of details. Would it be possible to say we would do either prefabrication, modular construction, or a complete rebuild prior to passing a bond? Because they've been pretty clear they want to know what they're getting for what they're voting for. Is
Sure. Yeah, I'll go ahead and take this one. So just as we have as part of your overall bond budget, right, a soft cost component, there's a cost component to the design factor. And so if the district is interested in spending money up front to do a more comprehensive design to put in front of the voters, that's certainly an option. It can be done. But then there's a lot of general fund costs that are dedicated to design of a project that the district does not know if voters will support or not. So that's sort of risky for the district. And then the other component on that too is the design engagement piece. We know that we want to have a really robust design engagement on this so that you have a middle school that reflects the goals and the qualities and the vision of Silverton. So as part of that, you need to get that input, but you want to make sure that you have a design that's going to be supported by everybody. And it tends to be a lot easier to do that, I think, once you know that you are moving forward with the project rather than when it is still a question. So you can do either way. It's at the district's discretion, but it's just a little bit of a question of where those costs fall into the project cadence.
I guess I'll kind of follow up on what Josh is getting to, or I kind of had a thought. I don't know if we need to see, people want to see plans, but they kind of want a flavor, a taste. So I'll use homes as an example. We can get you a double wide. This budget will get you a home like a nice double wide, or it'll be a Highline prefab home where everything's comes essentially as a kit and they put it together. This bond will get you something like this, or this bond will get you an architectural design home. There's various stages, and I guess that's just what people want a flavor, if you could say, this bond will build you a school, something like, name a couple of the schools in the area. I think that's all people are really looking for, and they can go do a drive-by and make a judgment call if that's a good value or not. That's the way I actually did a quick drive today. I drove to Jervis. They had a couple of real cheap modulars there. Like, well, that wouldn't work, or no, prefab. Then you go north a bit to Woodburn, and there's Heritage Middle School and Valor Middle School, or Honor, I can't remember. And those were a better. If we could tell people we're thinking something like this, go have a look at it. That's what I would say.
Other questions? All right, I think we are good with the question portion, Cassie.
Thank you, Cassie.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, let's go ahead and then move on to our potential high school projects. So this is all information that was presented as part of the Bond Advisory Committee. So originally we had 3 projects identified for the high school, which were the roof replacement, the controls, and the chiller. And then the Bond Advisory Committee felt very strongly that a security package should be included in the high school. So that's listed here as the 4th project. So all of these 4 projects together are just shy of $8 million. And just to run through them in more detail. So the roof replacement, as you know, the high school was built in 2 phases. The phase 1 roof is a built-up roof system that's about 28 years old, and the warranty is expired. And the phase 2 roof system is primarily single ply, and that warranty will expire in 2024. So both of those are coming up to, well, one of them's already there, and the other one is coming up to a place in which you're out of warranty. And we know that the district has already reported difficulties with that roof. The second item under here is the controls. So this is your mechanical system controls. What controls do is they direct and they monitor the way the mechanical system operates. They send signals to the equipment, tell it what to do. The controls in the high school are obsolete and non-serviceable, and so the district is very strongly recommending replacing those. The third item is the chiller. So this, or AKA air conditioning. So the chiller is the component that provides the cooling to the building, and that is also end of life. And then the 4th item on here is the security system. From a 90s building, back in the 90s, I had a Discman and a VCR, right? So all your security is old cabling, access control, cameras, those are all old and out of date. And just knowing how important security is these days, the Bond Advisory Committee felt really strongly that be included in the package. Okay, moving on to our next slide. So for the board's consideration for discussion, we wanted to put together the math for you on a couple of options. So one would be the Silverton Middle School replacement, which would be the James Street flip-flop option with a budget of $71 million. The district has gotten some extremely good news that they made the cut on the Awesome Grant. Very, very lucky, very good. So that option would be a $71 million total project, but it would mean it was a $65 million bond with your $6 million awesome state grant match. Option B on the right side would be if you did the same middle school project as in option A, but then you added the high school projects on there. That would give you a $78.95 million project, of which it would be a $72.95 million bond with your $6 million awesome grant. And then from here, I'm going to maybe look to Steve to help out with our last slide, which is updated information from Piper Sandler. Steve, are you good to speak to this one? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Cassie, and good evening, everybody. I just want to thank Jonah, Cassie, and Dale for putting this presentation together. They are outstanding partners, and I do think this was a very informative presentation that kind of takes us back 5 years to the present. So hopefully everyone found it helpful. My part of this is I worked with Lauren McMillan at Piper Sandler to do an update on financing numbers. Just to go back to post-election last November, I had reached out to Lauren to put together numbers, and I had just taken a stab at 75 million and 95 million at the time, with different types of financing structures in preparation for our end of November board work session, in which we discussed the election results, possible next steps, but I also presented Lauren's numbers. And so, as you recall, we then passed a kind of a broad-based formal resolution at the December 11th regular board meeting, in which the board, directed or affirmed that the intention at that time was to go out for another bond effort in May of 2024. Of course, there was no specific program selected, but that step was very important in that it allowed us to apply for the Awesome Grant with the state once again, and that was due on the 15th of December. And so, as Cassie mentioned, we were approved again for an Awesome Grant if the bond is to pass. Last time it was worth $4 million. This time it would be worth $6 million. So based then on our discussion in December, it did seem as if the direction was floating towards the aforementioned options A and B, either needing a $65 million bond or a $73 million bond. Of course, the other great information we found out was that the middle school now would cost $71 million rather than 75. So late last week, I forwarded you the full PDF version of Lauren McMillan's presentation from Piper. The slide that's up on the screen right now is specifically page 7 of that report, which I believe tells us the whole story. And so I just ran a comparison to what we had back in November, just to provide some reference. So besides a higher Awesome Grant, a lower cost of the middle school, the reason that these schedules were worth rerunning is because interest rates have come down at least approximately 3/4 of a point, just under a full point or percentage point, which is great news. So the other direction that was pretty clear in our last discussion was that there's a pretty strong preference by the board to focus on a bond that would not increase taxes above the current $1.96 per thousand of assessed value. So Lauren ran the schedule based on that, keeping a 196 per thousand levy, cost per thousand amount. And so you can see in the middle column, well, let me go back. The interest rates again have been cut, but because of that, we were looking at 25 and 30-year terms. But with this development with the interest rates, we are now would be looking at for a $65 million bond, $1 million bond. In this case, option A, new middle school only, would be looking at a 23-year term rather than 25-year term. And the total interest in that scenario previously would have been $92.9 million, and now it is down to $67.8 million. For option B, a $73 million bond, which is that middle column there, instead of a 30-year term, we could do it for a 28-year term and keep it at the $1.96 per thousand of assessed value. The interest in that scenario previously was $137 million, and now it is $98.8 million. So you can see those reflected in the column. So the third column there being the $65 million bond, middle school only, for 23 years. And then the middle column, the $73 million for 28 years, and a total interest of just under $99 million. Now, that other column titled Maintain $1.96 levy, all three of those scenarios are maintain $1.96. But what she put in that first blue colored column was basically saying we could go up to just under a $78 million bond, which would be close to $84 million in projects, and keep $1.96 per thousand at 30 years. So the one thing that this particular financing structure does to maintain that $1.96 per thousand is there is deferred interest involved, because you don't get into paying you don't start paying on the new bond really in earnest until the existing bond, is paid off, which Silverton High School Phase 2 pays off in June of 2027. So really that's about it. The scenarios all improved, again, because of reduced cost as well as better interest rates. And there's still a cushion built in to the scenarios as well for interest. I think that's really the high points to this. And we really wanted tonight's conversation to focus largely on the what Cassie, Dale, and Jonah discussed with the buildings and the options. And we definitely will have even more time to discuss financing on the 29th at our board work session as well. But definitely here to answer any questions as you have them right now.
Josh? Hey, Steve. Say we pass bond May 2024. When does that start to hit the tax statement? Is it the same year or is it the next year? Is there a delay on collecting that money? Yeah. Or is it immediate?
That's a great question. I would need to verify that, but typically bonds are sold within 3 to 6 months. They could also be sold in a couple of different chunks, so to speak, based on the need for the money. And because it's a May election, my feeling is that that wouldn't hit until the November 2025 tax statement, but I would need to validate that with Lauren McMillan.
Go ahead.
Steve, you mentioned deferred costs because of delaying until the other bond is off. Do you have any idea on any of the proposals, just pick one, what that might look like as far as how much that deferred cost would be?
Deferred interest?
Yeah.
It seems like one of the other pages might reflect that. Yeah, so actually on that specific page, Cassie, if you don't mind going, sorry, I guess you're still.
No, I'm not in the
Sorry,
Piper
sorry about
Sandler
that.
document.
Yeah, you can see the percentage. I can check on the dollar amount there, but in the just before the middle section there, under total par amount, you can see percent current interest bonds and percent deferred interest bonds. So you actually, it does show the dollar amount of the deferred interest there as well as the percentage. So for example, in our last presentation, when we were looking at besides the maintain the $1.96, we were also looking at combined level levy, which is actually the same financing methodology we used in last November's election, where it jumps up. Last election would have been what, 201 or 202 to 365, and it just stays there. That's combined level levy. In our last presentation, for I guess it was 25 years on 68 million is an example in the last presentation. To maintain $1.96, the deferred interest would have been 97%, and the current interest would have been 3%. But in a combined level levy, it would have been 28% current and 72% deferred, because you start paying on that debt immediately along with the old debt. The other methodology was the level levy, which is exactly what we did in 2007 with the Silverton High School Phase 2 debt. That's a scenario where you have X amount of debt outstanding, in that case, high school Phase 1, and then you jump it up for a short period of time. In that case, it was 2 or 3 years, and then it comes back down to a different level after the old debt was paid off. That's called level levy. So you start paying on that new debt in as much as you can right away. On the one that she did for us in November, on a $95 million bond, it was 76% current interest and 24% deferred interest. So you can kind of see on these, maintain a certain fixed kind of dollar. Well, nothing's guaranteed. The $1.97 was the goal, but $1.97 per thousand. You can see that the percentage of deferred interest as a relative to the total interest is quite a bit higher in that scenario.
Yeah, because what I was getting at, if it's significant amount, maybe it's wise to, for 2-3 years, whatever it is, I guess it's 3, you paid a higher amount and then drop it down. So.
Yeah, it wouldn't necessarily drop down to where we are now, but that's exactly what happened with the, in 2006 or 7 with the high school Phase 2 when that was approved. If you go to page 6, it's the previous page on that presentation that I sent you. It shows the graph, and when you go to 2007, the district was paying. It was somewhere, it looks like around $1.40-ish per thousand on the Silverton High School Phase 1 bond. And then when it passed, it jumped from that $1.40 all the way up to $3.50 per thousand, all the way through 2013. So we paid 6 years around that $3.50 mark, and then it dropped down to about $2 per thousand starting in 2014. So that's what that is.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Steve, maybe on this deferred interest thing, that's kind of a thing that's always I've always had a struggle trying to understand. But so say we got the $65 million option, and we're going to let's just say 61 million, let's round it up. 61 million is going to be deferred. So the interest will be deferred on it. So for every year it's deferred, that interest will just accrue. So, if it's deferred, if we get good interest rates. So if you got, say, a 3% interest rate, 3% of that money will be deferred. I mean, it'll increase the interest. And then you add another 3% for the next year and another one for the third year. So that's like increasing the cost, or the taxpayers will have to pay an extra, say, 9% or 3% per year to defer that for 3 more years. I hope that was kind of clear. And that's just what it costs. And I guess it really depends. I'm glad to see the interest rates are down, because that's a much lower option, but that's what we have to, we're deferring the payment,
deferring paying interest right away, yes, which just increases the interest price tag, but that's kind of the price to keep it at more of a, what your current tax rate is.
Right. But that extends it out. It extends the length of the bond to pay it off, and so it's a tough spot, and I'm just trying to understand it correctly. And I guess I'd say that I love this high school, but the project's not done yet because it's not paid for yet. We got 3 more years to go.
Yeah, a little over 3 years to go.
Yep.
I have a follow-up on that, Steve. So every year, we don't have a fixed deferred interest rate amount. Every year we don't pay the interest rate would increase an additional 3%. Is that what Tommy said?
No, I don't believe, no, the rate would remain, I mean, the true interest cost in the $65 million scenario is 5.4%. And as far as how that all works and how chunks of bonds are sold at different rates and how they blend that rate with deferred interest to come up to 5.4%, that would be definitely something for Lauren to explain. That's more her, daily kind of cup of tea, and we can definitely get some more details from her if need be, as far as how that executes out there.
I guess, Josh, maybe if Lauren can work up a scenario just for comparisons. Just pretend that the high school bond is paid off and we didn't have to do any deferred interest. What would that scenario look like, just for comparison? That way we can compare that way we can run the simulation as if the high school wasn't as if the high school was done being paid off and we had no deferred interest. And then we can see, this is what this deferred interest is costing us.
Yeah, and it would just shorten the term, right? I mean, basically, that's what you're buying.
Well, sure, you're shorting the term, so then we can get it paid off quicker and put roofs and things on other buildings.
You might be able to knock it down
in
to
the
25
future,
years instead of 28.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm, like I said, that's what I mean when I said I love this high school, but there's a hangover with this thing, and it's affecting our ability to come up with funds to take care of the rest of our buildings, and that's what I want to really avoid. I want to avoid it. Anyway, I want to avoid that.
Yeah. Well, I can see if Lauren would be available to pop into our January 29th work session. I haven't discussed that with her, but it was definitely something that we had thought about after introducing this to you.
Yep.
Aaron?
Yeah, I just think the key aspect on that too is, messaging to our community and our taxpayers that, if we want to keep the bonds same and defer it out longer, here's the option, and it'll be 196. Or we can keep it for, at 196 for most of the term, but maybe the first couple of years and the remaining part of this bond, to save the long-term dollars, we're going to increase that bond rate where it needs to be. It's going to be high for 2 years, right? And I don't know what that figure would be, say 2.5 years, but then it's going to go back down, right? And and we'll have to look at it, and that's why a comparison would be nice to see, is saying, okay, if we pay it now or pay it later, what's that cost going to be? Because we did hear a lot of input from our community about what is the total long-term cost of the bond, not just the bond rate itself. And so I think if we can get that figure, like, we would be able to really test what our community will tolerate when we seek this bond in May. Do we want to just keep it at 196 and run it out for the amount of the bond, but we pay a lot more interest? Or would our community tolerate a few dollars increase for 2 years for short term, then bring it back down, but they would save our community a lot of money and interest in the long run?
Yep.
Yeah. So what you're describing, Aaron, is exactly what we did in 2006, called the level levy option.
Yep.
It is not what we did last November. Well, I'll take the comments and discuss those with Lauren, and even show her the video of this part of the discussion, so she can maybe get some answers, and also possibly be present for a few minutes at least on the 29th.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions before Steve goes? Steve, thank you again for explaining complex things in ways that we can understand. We really appreciate you.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so you are asking us to discuss our preferences now between A and B, is
Yeah,
that
that
right?
pretty much finishes the presentation and the Q&A session, and now the time is the board's pleasure to discuss.
Okay. Can we get the slide back up to the A and B option, Daniel? Yeah, and have our visitors stay with us too.
Yep.
Good. So this is what Scott's asking us, so he can direct his efforts and his staff to say kind of like, well, what way are we leaning? Are we leaning more towards A? Are we leaning more towards B? Our discussion tonight doesn't bind us to any of those things, but they need a direction to go in to be efficient with their time and be prepared, because we've got about 6 weeks before we really need to make a decision on this. So
Well, I'll gummy up the works. I'd like to look at A, but twist it a little bit between A and B. And this is, I can't claim my idea. It's several people's ideas put together. But what about having a bond where the middle school is pared down? And I think an obvious pare down is, and I know there's people that this will bother, and there'll be some that will applaud it both ways. I've got a theory on a bond. A successful bond will probably make absolutely nobody happy, but hopefully it will make a higher number of people content, which is a big difference from happy. But I wonder about, you take that auxiliary gym off. We've got a big, nice gym over there, and it's going to get, a facelift, it sounds like, with the new building. And so whack $5 million off the number. And I think we could probably even maybe take a little bit more off based on these comparisons that they gave us. It seems like a lot of square footage. But the thing is, it was pointed out by Lauren, I think, that it's true. We don't get down into the weeds of an actual design to actually have the money. And so if we want to make sure that space is utilized well, you could, for example, make larger classrooms, which a lot of teachers would say would be very beneficial, and maybe take away some space and all this. This isn't written in stone square footage yet. But take off square footage, Jim, so you knock $5 million off this 71 figure for the project. Get down to 65, 66, which does compare square footage wise per foot a lot of these other buildings. And then take the awesome money and disperse that amongst all the other schools in our district. And do it by, say, figure out a way maybe by student population of each building. So obviously the high school would get monetarily would get a bigger chunk. It'd get the same amount per student, but it'd get a bigger chunk than, say, Prattham would. But all schools would get some. And we know that every school has needs. And it wouldn't fix all the needs at any one building, but it would get us on the road to it. And take that $6 million and divide it that way and use it for all our other buildings, and in an equitable way dividing it up. And then one cry has been for us to have a maintenance program going forward of how we avoid leaky roofs deteriorating our buildings. And again, it would be a slow process, but look at November maybe with a maintenance tax levy that's good for 5 years. Levy doesn't have any interest involved in it. It couldn't be very big. Steve, you'd be the expert on this, but as far as I know, if you got a room there between the gap of measure 5 and measure 50, you can do a levy and it doesn't affect your state allotment of money. If you get too high, then you levy too much, then it does. But $1 million, $2 million, whatever it is, and just that's dedicated to maintenance on top of what we already do out of our general fund for maintenance, but add to it that much. that's for 5 years. Show our clientele that we can wisely use that money that we're given for those 5 years, and what we're make it obvious what we're doing and how we're doing it, and gain trust. So then in 5 years, hopefully we can renew it if we've gained trust that we're going to use it wisely. But then we have a plan for maintenance, which a lot of people are crying about that we need, and I think justifiably so. So that's my thought.
I'll throw in my opinion and kind of also tie in some things with what Phil said. Yeah, I'm leaning. I'd like to see option B happen, because it does two things. Number one, it takes care of the biggest problem that we have in our district right now in terms of facilities, and that's Silverton Middle School. It is clear by many people who have been involved in the last, 6-year process, 5-year process, remodel is not feasible. It's a hodgepodge of existing structures right now. Everybody loves the look of the 1938 building, I do too, but it's no longer feasible. It's not a secure design from a standpoint of student and or staff safety. And we know that that is a high priority for every one of our educational facilities, not only here in our district, but across the state and across the country. Remodel is also not feasible for our students. And remodel is also not carrying out the will of the long-range facility planning committee and the bond advisory committee. Many people were involved. Myself, Josh, were both a part of the long-range facility planning committee, and Josh also on the bond advisory committee. Both committees understood that the middle school was past a feasibility for remodel, that replacement was 100% warranted and needed, and is the will of the folks on that committee. So I do want to honor the integrity of both those committees by carrying out a replacement for Silverton Middle School. I also want to see investment into this building. Every student that goes to the Silver Falls School District comes to this facility. This is a beautiful facility. But it is aging, and again, we have to remind everybody, it's not the new high school anymore. It's part of it's been here for more than 20 years, right? And we already have seen the slide of what needs to be done. We have obsolete controls. We have water intrusion, which we know kills structures horribly. It's a little wet here in Oregon, so we got to keep that high on our priority list in terms of keeping our buildings intact. If that $7.9 million will pay off threefold, in my opinion, or more, if we do it now. And again, every student in our district passes through this facility. Now, our original bond back in November touched every facility, and I thought that was ideal as well. That's not what our community desired, and we heard that loud and clear. But we still have to find a way to take care of the worst problem in our district, and that's Silverton Middle School. And then also give something to our community that every child is going to have the benefit of. And that's keeping this facility in the beautiful state it's in, so it does not go down the road of having too much deferred maintenance, as I'll use that term, which has been said a million times in every meeting. I'm going to address something that Phil said about the size of the middle school. I'd be willing to look at removal of the auxiliary gym. I would like to see it built as part of this project, because I don't think we'll ever regret it in the future. And as much as our buildings are used not only by our students every day, but also by community sports, community activities, these are such great vehicles that our district allows our club sports, our club activities to use, and that would just be another facility to use. I'll throw out an example. My daughter's on the cheer team. They're always trying to struggle to try to find a place to do their cheer practice when it's wet. Okay, there's Great. There's another facility that's part of our district that'd be part of it, right? So there's always clubs, groups, activities, teams out there that need space for practice or for activities. So I think it would be good for us to not eliminate that. However, to Phil's point, if it's the will of this board or we get significant community input, that would be an easy way to take some dollars off to get this passed by our community. And it would be one I'd be willing to consider. Not in favor of it, but I'd be willing to consider it. I do not think it would be feasible, or I do not think it would be wise for us to eliminate any of the learning and associated spaces within Silverton Middle School as proposed by our consultants and by the original concept design. Has anybody gone to any school ever and said, man, we built the school too big, there's too much room here? Educators, Jennifer, I'll ask you, Phil.
No, but how that space is utilized
I'm not done.
is huge.
I'm not done. I don't think you'll ever kick yourself on that. Whether it be common space like we have here at this facility, or even in the high school I went to in McNary, they added on a common space when I was a small kid, right? Even years before I got to the high school. But that common space wasn't necessarily a learning space, but it was well used and well needed space that I don't know how the school would operate if we didn't have it. Same here at our high school. So I think we need to really make sure that we're really investing in that future, because again, we don't want our kids crowded. No one likes a crowded school. And in my opinion, I'd rather see it slightly overbuilt in terms of square footage within terms of the learning capacity piece of it, than underbuilt, which is why I'm willing to consider, hey, maybe we do need to scale back the auxiliary gym. But yeah, I don't see that as being a good decision in terms of learning space and associated spaces within the actual academic or the part of the school at Silverton Middle School. The last thing I'll talk about too is Phil, you brought up a part about the community, with the maintenance budget. I think there's this misnomer that this district just doesn't have a plan for maintenance, or that it's almost insinuating when you're saying people are missing using maintenance budgets or do we don't have a plan. It's almost saying our maintenance department doesn't know what they're doing. And I think that's farther from the truth. From Dustin, who's here as part of our department, who Lauren was here before, and it's Jeff, who's our new supervisor. They've all developed massive plans to maintenance to take care of every building in our facility. The problem is just the capacity is too large to address that with the general fund. And I think the idea of the levy is not a bad idea. I think we need to be careful about saying that we've never had a plan, or we need to make sure we're developing a plan, because there's always a maintenance plan in place. And they're working hard to do it. It's just there's too many. There's too many projects. There's too many things out there for us to fix with what we can in the capacity of our dollars and cents, and also what our team can fix every year. But they work diligently to do that, and a lot of it's thrown away right now at the middle school, being honest. So
just a clarification.
Let him finish.
Yeah. So anyway, I just want to make sure that our folks know that our maintenance department really works extremely hard to make sure that our needs are met for our kids in the maintenance part. And I think any insinuation out there that we're in this predicament because they just haven't done anything for the last 20 some odd years since we unified is absolutely categorically false. So anyway, that's my opinion. I'll shut up now. So, but I appreciate you letting me kind of talk on this on a large scale.
Kind of clarify a point now.
Sure.
I just want to clarify on the maintenance part, Aaron. I didn't mean, and if it came across that way, I misspoke. I did not mean that maintenance did not have a plan, in that sense. What I meant, we didn't have a plan monetarily to fund it to where it needs to be. And with the levy, it would give us more money, a plan for money to get in there, which is a big difference than saying that no one's knowing what they're doing or doing. I was just talking about the financing of it.
Other people want to give their first thoughts about A or B or.
I will. Sure. as between these two plans, I'm in favor of B. Like Tom said, you know, any of these bonds are going to have a long hangover effect on our ability to raise more money in the future. And the needs that we have at the high school are, you know, they're urgent needs. They're important projects that are going to affect our ability to, you know, to continue to use the school and to maintain our assets here. And so I'm strongly in favor of B, because I don't think that we would find that money elsewhere. You know, if we were to pass A, I don't see another resource to come up with, you know, that $8 million for the high school projects elsewhere. You know, a maintenance levy wouldn't do a lot unless we spent the entire thing. Even then, it wouldn't, you know, fix those problems. You know, and I want to address the maintenance issue as well, because the way it came across to me is that, you know, well, I'll just put it this way. Maintenance dollars is not the reason we have failing roofs. Maintenance dollars is not the reason that our chiller has aged out. Maintenance dollars is not the reason that our security system is aged out, that our controls are aged out. Those don't have anything to do with maintenance dollars. Those are, you know, capital improvements that were done that have aged out and they need to be replaced. So, yeah, our maintenance department could definitely use some more money. There's things that they could do that we could do if we had more money, and that would be a good thing. But you know, a lot of these problems that we're suffering in our schools have nothing to do with, you know, maintenance, lack thereof, or anything else, just time. So my preference again would just be strongly for B, and I'm really in favor of building the auxiliary gym if we're going to go forward. We have a severe lack of gym space in this town, and it's sorely needed and well used.
Thanks, Owen. Others?
Yeah, I'll go. I guess A or B, I think you'd want to get rid of the auxiliary gym. That's just one of those things that I think people will latch on to. That was, when that was a high school, there was enough gym space there for a high school. We have lots of gyms in the district. I know, you know, Butte Creek's got a nice gym. People can drive out to visit those, and you know, a lot of people have to drive in to use the gyms for their athletic team practices. Maybe some people can drive out of town for some practices. That's just a thing that I think people will latch on to, and it saves some cost. I would like, and a lot of this, I'd like to think about an option C, and a lot of this hinges on what information we get from Steve and Lauren about what that actual cost of that deferred interest is, because I'm really afraid that if one of these two doesn't pass, we're going to lose the $6 million. So I wonder what an option C would look like. What's the minimum amount to pass to qualify for the $6 million awesome grant, and just go for that, and then hang on for 3 more years, you know, until the high school bond pays off and we're free of that. And maybe you know, but there's a lot of simultaneous discussions going on there. Just on a side note, I mean, I'm intrigued by the thought of a maintenance levy. I don't think that's part of this now. I think that's for the future. I kind of like the idea of it, because it might be a steady stream of money, and then the maintenance folks can plan projects. They can say, yeah, I got 3 more years left on that. We can do that in a few years, instead of having to do everything at once in the big grand projects. But on the other hand, my concern would be that for every dollar you give the district in a maintenance levy, another dollar in the general fund is just going to be reduced. And that would be, there would have to be some real safeguards there for considering that. And I think a lot of voters would be just very skeptical. So I think that warrants a discussion going forward, but not for now.
Derek?
Well, first of all, just appreciate hearing my colleagues' thoughts and input. As I sit here and wrestle with them, definitely leaning towards option B for a couple reasons. There's been a little conversation around start with the auxiliary gym. That's something I would entertain, scaling that back, but I think we'd want to make sure that, you know, I heard during the presentation, some of the things are like upgrading plumbing and electrical and making sure that those are, it's a little bit more than just like new paint. And so making sure those systems are sound. But I could see that as a concession if we're looking at how can we reduce costs. I'll echo some of the things that Aaron and Owen mentioned. I think the biggest need right now, obviously, is the replacement of the middle school. I know there's at one point the remodel option. And one thing that hadn't been mentioned is by moving towards a replacement over a remodel of the existing building and its space, is it doesn't allow us to take into consideration 100 years of like learning of the flow of education and creating a new space. I think there's something to be said for like learning from where we're at versus where we were in 1930s as far as like building a school facility for kids, thinking through the learning environment. We've had conversations around right sizing of the middle school, and Phil's pointed out to a couple of the things. One of the things that comes to mind too is we obviously have a lot of other buildings in our district that are aging. We just went through an ice storm. Like we could very well have another school or a school that has a burst pipe and it's flooded, and we need somewhere to move kids to temporarily while we replace that. So that's also kind of running through my mind of, right sizing the building. We never know when we might have to use that auxiliary gym for additional space. So, and then the high school. Obviously, if we do not take care of the high school, we're going to have substantial problems and be looking at how do we fix these down the road. So the high school projects, the roof, the chiller, security, cable, those are significant priorities. And so I think that this is a good option to put to the voters. We went out previously. This shaves about $60 million off of the previous bond that we went out for. Thought being it's a little bit more tangible. It's a little bit closer to hopefully a more palatable price point. And then, like several of my colleagues have mentioned, it touches every kid that comes through Silver Falls School District. And if that's our objective, to make sure that we are impacting all of the kids that call Silver Falls home, I think this, in its current fashion, is a good option to put to voters in May.
Thanks, Derek. Josh?
Yeah, I obviously have a lot on my head, or in my head, and not a whole lot on top of it. I guess I just feel a lot of pressure to make the right decision. Want the public to know that I just want to make the right decision. It's not what I want or what think, or I just want to make sure that we do what's best. So I don't want to run another bond that fails and lose the awesome grant. I don't know what it would look like. Owen's thing he mentioned a couple board meetings ago really, and what Tom mentioned tonight, really was interesting to me on a couple of reasons. So let's just say if we get May, we put it on the ballot, and people don't vote for the middle school because of some reason they don't like the trust or whatever I saw on social media, how quickly could we turn around again to just make sure we take care of the high school? Like, that's my question with an awesome grant. And how much money does it take to get an awesome grant? Like, assessment wise. Like, I don't want to run a bond. I know that there's a lot higher likelihood of passing a high school, like fix our roof, a small bond, because I don't think people want to pay more than they're already paying taxes wise. And if we can keep it at that $1.96, that's great. But I also saw that higher amount in paying, like I looked at the amount of interest that we're going to have to pay compared to the 65 to the 78. It was, I'm just going to throw like $20 additional million in interest. I don't know on the bottom there, but okay. And so my concern is, what does a failed bond get us? And it might be a lot more of a loss than if we run what I call the Owen plan. Get us run a 10 million bond, you get the 6 million awesome, you fix our roofs, security, maybe a couple critical things at the outlying schools, and then we wait until June 27. And then say we run a middle school bond or have time to think about it. And then we don't have any increases in taxes and no paying interest on old bonds. But say we run let's just, now in my head, let's run this one. What do I think will pass for the middle school? And then between A and B, I mean, I'm definitely in favor of B because the high school needs to get taken care of, and I want the awesome grant. As far as the auxiliary gym, I'm not in favor of getting rid of it because I don't think it's forward thinking. I know that we need spaces. Athletics brings the community together. I've been here more this week, just kind of sporting events. Everybody's here. It's awesome. The extra space for the Christmas thing that we have and other community events gives us another place to go. I didn't even think about needing space in case there's a catastrophic failure to other schools to have extra room. So I'm not in favor of getting the auxiliary gym, but I'd entertain it. I'm also concerned that all the outlying schools, like this will be a 20-year, 23-year term bond, 25-year term bond, if we go for it-ish. Are we going to be able to pass another bond in 10 years, 20 years to address all the significant other needs to all the surrounding schools? Like, what about their needs, and how are we going to address that? Yeah. I don't think the community will really want to go above $2. And how do we get community feedback in 6 weeks to like what they would like? So, I feel the pressure as a board right now to really do our best, but I don't really know how to do that. That's my internal struggle. So,
Jennifer, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're
you.
okay,
Steve
Scott.
had his hand up, so he might be able to provide some information to clarify. I just wanted to
think
point
you
that
can
out.
respond to that, the questions Tom and Josh have raised about the awesome grant.
Yeah, just you only have to spend as much as the awesome grant, so it could be $6 million and $6 million. St. Paul, I believe, was one of the only districts that passed a bond in November, and that's what they did. It was like a $4 million and $4 million.
What is it? Is there how much money estimated? Do you know that it costs to apply? Is there assessments involved with that, and that costs money to get site assessments? Because I know there's a bunch of paperwork you're gonna have to fill out, Steve. Well, future Steve.
Paperwork for the awesome grant?
Yeah.
Or?
Well,
this is the last election that we can use our current facility assessment report to be able to apply or be eligible for the awesome grant. After the May election, we'll have to redo the facility assessment report, which is actually the easier of the two requirements. There's the facility assessment report, and then there's the long-range facility master plan report, which clearly we can get the assessment report done more quickly in renewing that. The long-range facility master plan report, I think, still would be viable for a couple more years. So just applying for the awesome grant, assuming those two requirements are in place, is not a difficult task at all. It's a quick process.
thank you, Steve. And I guess my last thought on this would be, I'm absolutely for also just putting on the ballot to let the people decide. Let them vote. They want the middle school or not, but is it the middle school that they would vote for? And that's the hard decision.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, and we are somewhat limited to
Yeah.
the work that has already been
Correct.
done. And so I think, like Aaron, I would be hesitant to change much about the work that's already been done. The auxiliary gym, I'm maybe open to, with a compelling argument, to trimming. But a lot of people are talking about after-school uses of the auxiliary gym, but PE is my big concern about having enough space for kids to have PE. I know right now at the middle school, the 6th graders use the mezzanine, which is not really a very big space, and there's a lot of shuffling that goes on. So I'm wondering if we could hear from Brett about what the impact would be for PE, because PE is super important in my book. So I agree with a lot of the things that people said. Also, totally open to talking about a levy for maintenance, but not until we get the middle school figured out. And I'm not interested in a smaller bond that would capture the Awesome grant because it doesn't address our district's biggest need, which is the middle school. And I just can't see making a plan that does not address the middle school. That just doesn't, that is going to be a real hard sell for me. It's a real hard sell. I think that we need the middle school because if we don't replace it, it's going to affect every other school in the district. And that's why we need to put something on the ballot in May. It's also, whether it passes or not passes, we are committing to try to fix this problem that is the biggest problem by putting something on in May. And so between A and B, I can't deny B in the sense that, especially the security really is super important. Like, I don't think that there's probably much that functions here in terms of cameras, because we're still using that 1990s technology, and that is super important for keeping kids safe. And like Owen said, I don't know where we get the money for the rest of that stuff on that list besides with a bond. So I guess what I'm saying is that B is where I am leaning. I am willing to consider trimming the auxiliary gym with more information and maybe more robust discussion around the auxiliary gym. And I think that was everything that was on.
Jennifer, I
my
do
list.
notice that Jonah has his hand raised.
Oh, Jonah, please chime in.
Yeah, apologies if this is redundant. Steve, you may have mentioned it, but one thing that's taken into consideration too is the Awesome grant. If you're successful and you get it, you can't apply for another 6 years. So if you're able to get it, say you did 6-6 and you got it in May, it wouldn't be until 2030 that you could be able to get another Awesome grant.
That's very valuable.
Yep, thank you for that, Jonah.
I've got one more thing.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I got a concern about the remodel process or rebuild process. It's the maintenance building that's there.
Mm-hmm.
It's a perfectly good building.
That's a question for the
So
Jonah.
I would like to see if we could keep it, because I know I've been told specifically that people would see that as a significant waste of resources to tear a building down, move it, and rebuild it when one already works. So passing that along.
I've asked about that. I can't remember the exact response, but is that something that Jonah can answer? Or Cassie?
Yeah, one of the considerations for the maintenance building was just its placement and its adjacency. It certainly could be evaluated on keeping that building as a maintenance building. It does impact pretty significantly the ability to look at that site and get some really good site circulation and site security. But it's certainly, anything's possible, to be honest.
And I'll add to that, the consideration isn't just the building itself, it's how the rigs are getting to the building with the middle school and its position on the north side of the site. So it's drive pathways and all of that need to be considered as well.
Yeah, so it's just generally not a good setup to have it right next to the middle school. Other questions, comments?
I might just make one comment. This is kind of to state the obvious, but we've had a lot of discussion around bond rates and what our community is willing to pay and how are we going to cover all these needs. I mean, it seems to me the fact of the matter is at some point, and it's not going to be now, But at some point in the future, if our community wants to take care of all its school buildings, our tax rate's gonna have to go up above what it is now. If our tax rate remains at what it is now, we are never gonna take care of those needs, and we're gonna continue to have deterioration of other facilities. That's just a fact.
I guess I got another thought. It's just about the big picture of how things change. It's like, how many people remember A&Ws, the Taco Bell? Eugene Field, probably in 10 years, nobody's really going to talk about it. We're probably going to say, man, that's a really nice building with, look at that extra park space, parking. I would imagine that if hopefully we do something to the middle school, eventually we'll be grateful for the change we made. Because we do have to do something. We can't keep continuing in the path we're going. And I really feel hopeful that we can make those positive changes. I read all the old minutes from 2013 and 2014. It was fascinating to me how we're having the same conversation 10 years later. The questions about misuse of money, trust, questioning bids, they were all there about Eugene Field and Schlater Street, the middle school building. And the intention was to eventually move those kids to the middle school at the Schlater Street. We have done that. We were hoping to pass a bond a long time ago to make that building what it was dreamed to be in 2008, and just haven't been able to do it. So,
Along with what Josh is saying, there's comes a point when not only our board, but our community, we got to stop kicking things down the road. And as you said in the minutes from 10 plus, almost 11 years ago, there was a lot of can kicking, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. It's just economic times were tough at certain points, and we have the recession. We had unification, which brought in a lot of factions and communities trying to function as one. There's multiple factors that we all have known and learned and talked about at many meetings. But I guess at some point our community has to just come in and say enough, and not kick this down the road anymore, because we can't afford it. It's gonna come to a head at some point. And is that a head when something catastrophic happens at the middle school and we can't use it? I don't want it to be that. I'd like to get ahead of that a little bit, right? So at some point we have to just stop kicking things down the road and deal with it. Yes, it costs a lot of money now. Had we done this 15 years ago, I can guarantee you it'd probably been half that, right? But at some point we're gonna have to do this. We can't do this any longer. And I'm like with you, Jennifer, like any other thing that doesn't deal with the middle school, we're placing it right now, doesn't deal with the biggest need in our district. And it's not feasible to put on the ballot.
I got a final thought, and just like perspective of who we work for, the kids in the district, and then their family and parents and grandparents to pay taxes here, and we can always try for the perfect plan, but I feel that our job is to come up with a good plan that addresses the needs right now. And I think what we see on the screen there, this is a good plan. It gets us a new middle school, which is what we need. It fixes the high school issues, which is what we need. So while there might be discrepancies about, should we go with this plan or a different plan, how much is too much? It keeps us close to the current tax base that we want. And so I think for right now, this is a good plan. And then ultimately, our job is to present that to the voters, and they're the ultimate decision makers about whether it's a good plan or not. And that's kind of the final check mark. And that's why I'm in favor of, going this May, because the problems are so immediate. Like right now, if we don't fix these, they're just going to continue to get worse, probably to a point where we can't pay for them.
Which ties back to what Owen mentioned.
Also, Jonah's point about that 6-year, that changed my mind.
It's a good piece.
You have to go for the big one, because if you fail, at least you still have the option to scale down again. You get the small one, it doesn't address the middle school, you're stuck for 6 years trying to figure that out.
And we can't wait for 6 years.
And you don't want to waste $6 million.
For the middle school, no. All right. So where we're at now, do you feel like you need any more clarification?
No, I think you all have done a terrific job of describing your thoughts and your perspectives. I guess what I'm hearing, I just want to make absolutely sure I'm hearing the board correctly, that the board is leaning towards B. Is that it?
I think so.
Can I get a nod or from, I'm getting that feeling? Okay. Just want to make sure.
I would also like the people, is there a way to scale it down?
Well, what
besides
we
the
can,
gym, or-
we're
Yeah.
certainly could come back in February with some scenarios around the auxiliary gym. That's no problem. We could have Brett here also to talk as a principal on what that gym would mean for his school community. That's not a problem at all.
Yeah, the other scale down discussion, I just don't know if we have the public input, to mess with that, and the time from staff that it would take in order to ferret all of that out.
We have 6 weeks. That's what we have. And we lost a week having to move this board meeting, roughly. And that's, once we file on March 1st, that's it. We can't be in advocacy role anymore, and that would be you as a board, so.
Well, Jennifer, wouldn't it be too during the design phase? I mean, right now we've got a projected total square footage, but wouldn't it be during the design phase too, that when they're looking at this in more detail, that, if they find that they can trim 500 square feet here and a few feet there, and, the whole thing comes down? I mean, that's a possibility too, I would think.
Yeah, and that was exactly what I was thinking when you asked for that, because I think in general, we all would prefer to have an auxiliary gym, because that's additional space for our kids. It's forward thinking. And if, like Phil said, there's common areas that maybe they were counting on making a little bit bigger, but we could scale down or eliminate.
Yeah, just, if I may, a scale down. And when I say scale down, yes, it's real easy to amputate the gym. However, having said that, it's kind of a red flag to me when the square footage is so high compared to these other buildings for the per student. And so, and I'm not in the weeds of how that got determined, but obviously you need X amount of classrooms and you need support things and everything. But I guess what I'd need to see is, before I could get excited about that big, is why that big compared to these comparisons.
When you
Because
say
the comparison, the comps we were given, you look at the capacities they were built for, and you look at the square footage, and we're higher than all of them. And so I guess I'd need a better explanation of why. Because yes, as an educator, there's nothing worse than building something too small. But if there's a difference between some fancy staircase going up somewhere that's got a sitting area beside it, as opposed to having a classroom that's big enough that a teacher can use it and configure with the kids. And so, to me, educationally. And so.
question for you on the total square.
And no offense to the architects, but architects are good at putting in those spaces that our space, they cost you bucks, but do they do anything
Can I ask a
educational?
question on the square footage space? Or are you talking, when you're saying we're much larger, is it the actual new construction that we're putting in?
Yes, I'm not even looking at.
I'm
not
not
even.
existing. You're talking just the 91,000.
Yeah, you take the gyms off these other buildings and you look at our 91, and the square footage per student is higher than ours than it is in all these others.
So that just the
All
91
the
we're talking
comps.
about, we're not talking about just the
Yeah,
existing
every
gym
one of them.
space. Okay.
I guess I would offer this as far as the auxiliary gym discussion. If we're using the $5 million number, if there's $5 million for an auxiliary gym, could that And if the voters would approve that, would that $5 million be better used somewhere else in the district?
All right.
And get more buy-in? 'Cause that's kind of, I mean, I'm still kind of stuck. When I went to high school, that was a fully flat, I was a going high school, and there was more than enough PE space. That's a giant gym and a big mezzanine.
I'm not sure every kid in high school takes PE, but every kid in middle school takes PE.
And maybe that's something, yeah, I don't.
It's also the only subject in the state that mandates minutes. And that's only been in place for a number of years.
Yeah, I mean, so if the stand, I guess I'd like to see what the standards or what they are. It seems to the layman, me, that's a lot of athletic space there, but maybe I don't know the standards. So,
My last comment on the gym is it increases our ability to run tournaments. Also, that being in proximity to the high school, I could just imagine the people we could bring in to run tournaments that would raise money for local businesses and to the public in general. I mean, I've been to some larger communities in my time, and when you, especially Corvallis, when they run this massive volleyball tournament because of the gyms, they do it between OSU and the high school. They're using like every gym. I imagine having an extra one. We could run some killer basketball tournaments, pickleball tournaments, and make some money too. So it's just a thought.
I just want to respond to Phil's comment about the square footage, because when I looked at the list of square footage, I had that question. I asked it to Scott. And I don't know if there's time. And if there's not time and we can't afford it, then I understand. But maybe asking our experts about those spaces, because in my book, I'm now doing like supervision. That's now my new work. Any space that does not have a dedicated person to supervise is like,
especially in middle school,
wasted. And so I guess I would go along. I would prefer to find ways to trim any of that space over the gym.
I agree. Totally.
So yeah, but I also realize that we can't make miracles happen at this point in time. So I guess I say that with the caveat that it's okay if staff just determines that that's not workable.
So I'm hearing option B. Am I hearing the board? Okay, that's the will of the board. Certainly, Jennifer, we can put together a couple different scenarios that outline what yours and your colleagues' concerns are around the square footage piece regarding the auxiliary gym. We can do our best. And board chairs, we meet with board chairs once a week, and so we can talk about that further on seeing if that would answer questions. Probably won't have it for the board work session, but definitely have it by the 12th of February.
Okay. That's great. All right, well, let's move on then to our second public comment. And maybe there will be public comment that might add to our discussion. And it looks like Colin wants to speak, so come on up. And I'm going to ask you about 4 questions before you start.
Okay.
First, identify yourself.
Colin Scott.
And what's your relationship to the district?
Alumni, parent,
And
spouse.
are you speaking for yourself or a group?
Myself.
And
Well,
so you'll
and
have
my spouse.
You'll have 3 minutes.
Okay.
And the topic that you're going to speak about.
The bond school. I think the gym is a non-starter. I think it has to stay in, and I think the reason why is instead of saying what we can't get, why don't we sell what we need it for? We need it for PE. We need it for volleyball. There's more volleyball teams than there's ever been. There's more basketball teams than there's ever been. I did a lot with youth baseball. We had people come to this complex out here for tournaments and said it was one of the best they'd ever seen. It was awesome that we had it. And when I was, we talk about when I was a kid or whatever, when I was a kid, we played one baseball game every Saturday. And that was on a few fields. Now kids are playing 2 times a week, tournaments on the weekends. There's more demand than ever for gym space. My 4th grade daughter is practicing from 7:30 to 8:30 for her basketball team because that's the time when we can fit everything in. So to me, why not sell why we need it, not talk about why we can't afford it? And I think that's, you guys are the board, and I think you guys need to sell yourselves on why you guys feel like we need these things and what it's going to bring. And to me, while you're doing it is the time now. I mean, you're not going to, like you say, you're not going to get it again. I'm really intrigued by the levy idea. I think that's a great idea to help fix some things. And so just that. And I was curious on the awesome thing. If you can't apply for it if you get it, if you don't get it, what's the amount going to be next time? Might it only be 2 million? Does it change? Does it go up or down? Or is it always now 6 million, or could it go up?
Could it just change to 6
Okay.
million?
So anyway, that was my thing, is I think that the gym and those types of things need to be sold as a benefit, not as a hindrance. And I know it's tough because of money, but that to me is a really important thing. So thank you.
Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Colin.
I'm going to ask if there's anybody online that wants to speak.
I do not see any hands raised.
All right. Anybody else in the audience? Come on up, Max. Max?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and speak briefly. I'm Max Murphy. I have children that have been at the went to the high school, and I've got a son currently in the middle school. Just briefly on some of the discussion we had on a possible remodel. I'm I've been in the heavy civil marine construction, heavy commercial construction. The company I work for right now is doing the remodel at the state capitol. That's 25% over budget, about $100 million over budget for those unforeseen costs. Just like these folks up here said, it's a risk. You just don't know what you're going to get into. I think that we need to keep the gym. I think today it might be a $5 million savings. 6, 8 years, 10 years down the road, we want to build that gym. It's going to be far more than $5 million, I guarantee you. So thinking into the future for the needs for that. I also think it's a huge asset to the bond. I think there's a lot of folks in this community that are big on sports, and they're going to see that as a plus to the bond. I like the idea and some of the discussion about other options, or option B or option C. We're 6 weeks away.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we have time for that. I'd like to rearrange the furniture on the deck of the Titanic, but if we don't take care of this problem right now, we're going to sink. That's how I view it.
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciate everybody on the board's commitment to this and all the work that you put in, and your architects. It's a big job. It's a lot of money. I think that we have carved it back from 138 million to what it is now. And if that's not palatable to the community, I don't know what is. Funding schools is a hamster wheel. That's the way we fund schools. We're going to need more bonds in the future. Thinking about whether a bond will pass or not pass 5 or 8 years from today is not the issue at hand. We are going to need more bonds. That's just how we pay for things. Our maintenance budgets aren't going to cover major capital improvement projects. We're always going to have a roof that's going to get run its life. Your maintenance isn't going to take care of that. So anyways, those are my thoughts. I appreciate it. You guys take care.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you, Max.
All right, come on up.
All right, I am Ammon Sabo. I have a 6th grade in the district. You guys were wise enough to appoint me to the oversight committee that we didn't end up needing, but hopefully we will. And I am fortunate enough to be a substitute in the district.
Oh, thank you. That's great.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's a blessing. So I want to first thank you all for your work. This is not easy work. I've seen some of you guys come before the planning committee, worked with Aaron on the budget committee. So I would encourage us to first really think about that tax rate. Increasing it is not easy. But paying $98 million in interest is insanity. So any way that we can get, that's another school. Think of it that way. So any way we can get that down, we could, but at the same time, the goal is to pass the bond. I think you've done a great job of showing a very clear disconnect from the previous bond. Way too much money, it's the bare bones, the high school. So Plan B is what I'm here to speak in support of. And real quick, as a substitute, I want to speak to that, the gym. The gym is first and foremost absolutely necessary. The gym is second, which I was very pleased to hear, is a revenue generator if operated correctly. We would not build a new middle school and say, except for the social studies room, except for the library. It's absolutely required. I have taught PE in that gym multiple times. It is not adequate. It is not adequate. They don't even have enough room to store the equipment. I encourage you to take a tour over there because you'll see teachers in furnace rooms. That's where their desks are. Locker rooms with no benches. Students sitting on the ground, changing, one working toilet, things like that. It is not up to standard. And if this whole process has taught us anything, it's protect the infrastructure we've had. The taxpayers have already invested in the seismic of that. We have the money to update it, and we can make that back with renting the building out. Also, that gym is a safe space prior to school and after school for kids that are waiting for their rides. This type of year right now, rather than waiting outside when teachers are trying to prep, you can't have your students in there doing it. The kids go to the middle school gym. That's where they're supervised. You can put them all together, let them get the energy out, security's there. It's a cooling down period. Same thing afterwards. It's a safe space for them. It's also a special education space. I hope you guys know that. So any of you, I've subbed here at the middle school across from the special ed room, and due to the nature of their thing, their disabilities, their learning challenges, they can be very loud. So in the middle school, those students go to the gym. Also, it's not just the gym. It has the band room there. It has 3 other classrooms there. It's investment. I would, just a guesstimate, you'll lose 50% of the middle school parents' vote if you take that gym off of there. So thank you again for your work. I really appreciate it. And let's go kick some doors in and get this thing passed. That's a figurative speech, sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hammond.
Thank you.
Anybody online?
Nobody online.
Anybody else from the audience? Jean?
Thank you, Madam Secretary, or Madam Chairman. I'm Gene Pfeiffer. I am a design build specialist for over 50 years. I was the chairman of the high school relocation in 93 and in 99. So I'm very aware of the responsibilities we have and what was decided in the 1994 bond. And I'm hearing myself. So may I have more than 3 minutes?
3 minutes.
I think the fellow who was just here was more than that. Okay, so last time I was here, I said, let's get this done. I heard discussion about, let's find out some more factors about what would the cost be literally if we were to do something with the 1938 Schlater building. Dr. Ort talked about, well, at least we could have somebody do that and we could find out if it can't be done. Well, now we come to this meeting, all this is being decided by one group that is telling you that their cost is 23%, unheard of. Locally, that same cost for engineering, designers, architects, and the administration would be more like 10 or 12%. You should be questioning that. We have people that are doing all these expensive buildings. We're just little Silverton. And we just spent all this time with them, so I'm going to say this bluntly. In 1994, the bond said right on it, and when we voted, it said we were going to save Schlater for the middle school. We're not doing that. Now we're following this path. To me, it's like going to a car dealer that sells cars for $200,000 and we can't afford it. I've offered to help you get it passed, get something passed where we find a passage of maybe 70 to 30. I believe it was actually out there the last time. People want to get this done, but we're not going to get it done this way. I don't think that you want to go have a bond presented again, spend another $200,000 and have it fail. I'm predicting that it will. If you go for A or B, I believe it will fail again. It's not about Gene Pfeiffer. I'm just trying to be responsible what we have decided previously and what we need to do. I'm experienced also in the construction area. So where there's no consideration of the rural in it. There was mention about making a small portion go to them. I know how angry many of those people were before. It's going to happen again. We have people out there that are sensible. We talked about modulars and stuff. Marvin Shetler went with me, as I wrote you today, and looked at the plans for the Schlater building. He said we should not be tearing that building down. He's a modular builder. He doesn't promote that. He's just saying sensibly we should be taking care of it. We talk about life of buildings, modulars. Modulars should last 500 years also. The Schley
30
building, if
seconds.
we remodel it, it should last 500 years. The issue is, what can we afford? We would have been better the last 2 hours having a couple psychiatrists talk to us rather than Winaha. Winaha has all these expensive things they want to do. It is not affordable. We can't afford it. And people, I predict, are going to say no. They're not going to go for it. We should go to local people. We could get it done, I predict, for about $40,000 with a structural engineering contractor. Give us a good report and tell us frankly and break it down what can be done.
Thanks, Jean.
Thank you.
Anybody else from the audience want to come address the board? All right, thanks, everybody. We'll move on then to our action items. We have 2 action items, 12A, SIA grant agreement. Is there a motion?
I so move to, for the grant agreement, the SIA grant agreement.
Okay.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the SIA grant agreement. I'm assuming no discussion, but I'm looking last minute. All right, let's vote.
Josh,
Yes.
Derek,
Yes.
Owen,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Phil,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
all in favor.
All right, 12B is the early literacy grant application. Can I get a motion?
I move to approve the early literacy grant application as shared.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the early literacy grant application as shared. Any discussion? Let's vote.
Josh,
Yes.
Derek,
Yes.
Owen,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Phil,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
all in favor.
All right, the last item on our agenda is a future agenda item request. Does anybody have anything that they would like to be considered on a future agenda? All right, it looks like the answer is no, and so we will say meeting adjourned.